Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel discussion on EU digital autonomy. I'm Simon Nixon. I'm a journalist. I edit a newsletter about European international political economy, having previously been a columnist at the Times and the Wall Street Journal. Before I introduce the panelists, just to introduce the subject, I've been to a lot of panels here in Delphi in the last day or two, which have been discussing the enormous strategic challenges facing Europe in a sort of volatile geopolitical environment. And but one of the things I think is, obviously true is that foreign policy begins at home. That you can't have a strategically secure Europe without an economically successful and secure Europe. And at the core of that is making the European economy more competitive and more productive and able to grow faster, and digital goes to the heart of that. The European Commission, just at the start of the decade, set out a strategy which they called for the European Union Digital Decade. They said this was going to be, and they set out a digital compass and with roadmaps and targets, with quite ambitious targets covering infrastructure, skills, business, and government. Anyways, we're very fortunate because we have a panel that has great expertise in each of these areas. And so we have on my immediate right, Annette Aris, who's Vice Chair of the Board of ASML, the Dutch semiconductor manufacturing giant, and also Professor of Strategy at INSEAD. Then we have Viviane Reding, who was the Vice President of the European Commission with responsibility for digital from 2009 to 2014. And then we have Max Nikias, who is the President Emeritus at the Malcolm Currie Chair for Tech and Humanities at the University of Southern California. And then Marc Julian Siewert, who is Chief Executive of Veridos, and Haris Broumidis, who is Chief Executive and President of Vodafone Greece. So I'm going to do, since we don't have a huge amount of time, is firstly to ask the panelists to discuss where we are in terms of the European digital decade and in terms of in the different areas, and then afterwards what they think could be done better, or or what needs to be done to achieve these targets. So if I could start with you, Haris. Obviously infrastructure is a huge part of the digital decade, and also digital services for businesses are also a part of it. How do you see the progress and the state of the EU digital market?
Good afternoon. So I may start that the data are pretty worrying. Currently, we know that the European Union has a GDP growth of barely 1%. The share of EU in global output is said to be at 15% by 2028, which is 10 percentage points lower than it used to be 10 years ago. We definitely have a shortage in many respects when it comes to digital skills. And we know that 9 out of 10 jobs going forward do require digital skills. When it comes to 5G deployment, which is the layer of connectivity that we need in order for all verticals to flourish, if we talk about real 5G, transformative 5G with 1 gigabit, a very low latency, the European Union is at 25% population coverage, while in the US it's 85 and in China 95. And when it comes to AI, 73% of big AI models are developed in China, in the US, and 15% in China. So there are a lot of different data points that tell us that we need definitely some reform in order to be in a position as European Union to bridge this divide. We assigned as Vodafone a research a year ago that definitely indicates that 10% increase in the digital economy and society index, the famous DESI index, if we manage to increase by 10%, this gives an additional 0.65% GDP growth, which means that if 5 years from now, all countries in the EU reach this 90 points in the DESI index, we are talking about an opportunity of 1 trillion euros, which in essence is one more Netherlands in the output of Europe. Strategic autonomy and green transition of the EU definitely goes hand in hand with networks, especially 5G. And you know 5G is the one that is going to unlock the industrial internet, as 4G unlocked the consumer internet. So we need to work on that, and we need to have an environment that, you know...
So, Harris, if I might just stop you there, because we'll come back to what can be done in the next, in a second. I mean, you set out some pretty stark statistics there in terms of how far Europe is behind in infrastructure and 5G rollout.
Just 2 words. For me and for us, the common denominator are networks and digital skills, and this is where we need to work far more intensively.
If I could just go then to you, Julian. Veridos obviously is a leader in identification, and you know, the EU's identified government as a key area for digital strategy. How do you see the state of play in terms of digitization of government?
Thank you, Simon, and good afternoon. So, yeah, Veridos in G&D is a security tech company for more than 170 years in the business. And when we look at some data points, so I want to chip into that, we see in the last 4 decades about approximately 5% of spend in R&D. And in the end, you see on a global scale, in the end, you see what you spend today in R&D is the economy of tomorrow. That adds up to 2,475 billion US dollar, out of which 680 billion are spent in the United States, 550 in China, 180 in Japan, and 143 as a number 4 distant follower in Germany. In the whole of Europe, it's 530. So the whole of Europe is spending 20 billion less in R&D for technology of the future than China alone. And we see the EU as a whole relatively falling back in the R&D spend. Now talking specifically our business in terms of digital security, we really call for a digital agenda, for a sovereign agenda for Europe, because Europe has been focusing on legislation and on regulation in terms of digital development as well, which has a lot of focus on the individual rather than a sovereign strategy for an EU digital agenda. And when we look at surveys that, for instance, we did in Germany with the largest association for digital, so this includes AI, semiconductor, programming, more than 60% of the companies say they rather purchase the technology from outside than trying to develop it inside, mainly because of this kind of regulation. So we need to create a sovereign agenda which allows an environment on a European scale to really develop these technologies and invest.
Okay, well, we'll come back in a minute to ways in which that might be done. Annette, I know you're not speaking for AMSL because you're a non-executive director, but one of the objectives of targets of the European Digital Decade is that Europe should grow its share of semiconductor market from 10% to 20%. So I suppose, firstly, is that a feasible target, and is it actually a desirable target?
So maybe let me start with disagreeing with the previous speakers.
Yeah, that's always a good start.
I do think Europe is in good shape. I do think that, yes, infrastructure, 5G, we're a bit below, but as the spectrum and other things, I know many telcos are really about to pull the trigger and roll it out. We have a fantastic glass fiber network rolled out in many countries. We have very well educated people, lots of digital awareness, high level of digitization. Yes, we might not have enough skills, but there are a lot of people from abroad who are dying to work here in Europe. So I don't think we are in very bad shape. I am a bit worried about the fact that indeed a lot of the power is with the US and China. So if you look at data centers, if you look at investment in AI and Gen AI, a lot of those things are in China and in the US. The question is, how do we best counter this in Europe? Are we going to duplicate everything and running behind in a complicated world where we have many small markets and we cannot create the next big giant? Or are we going to build on our strengths? And our strengths are very much in the B2B, in many individual companies doing great stuff in digitizing. If I take ASML as an example, but not only ASML, but also Carl Zeiss in Germany and Trumpf, they have unique technologies, the only ones in the world, and they are negotiating chips in the world. So we shouldn't try to spend a lot of money and duplicating and produce 20% of the microchips in Europe. We should be sure we can become resilient, not only by duplicating, but also by making the mutual dependency bigger and having things in Europe other regions really want to have. And that will give us negotiating power. Also, we had some really, really good regulation introduced by the EU. Maybe Viviane will say a bit, the Digital Markets Act, Digital Service Act, AI Act. It would be fantastic if the whole world would adopt that. But in order to get other regions to adopt it, we need bargaining power. So rather than talking about the quantity of R&D and doubling everything, I think it's really about focusing on a few things where we have bargaining chips.
Thank you. Right. Well, before I come to Viviane as a sort of policymaker sort of perspective, or a former policymaker perspective, I was going to go to Max because we've now had Harris talk about a lack of skills, but Annette is slightly less concerned on the skills side. Coming from the academic world, particularly, what's your thought on skills? And also, if you want to disagree with other members of the panel on other things you've heard, please do.
Right. Well, let me say that when it comes to this particular industry, which of course includes, as was already mentioned, the semiconductor chips, the biggest by far threat that this industry is facing, not only in Europe and the UK, in the United States, and that includes Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, the biggest threat is not China or any other reason, but the shortage of skills. And I know, for example, Germany is luring in Intel and TSMC to set up manufacturing facilities for semiconductor chips there. I saw an announcement of ASML, I believe a few months ago, they want to hire 4,000 people. TSMC is setting up a facility in Arizona. They need to hire 27,000 people for 2 nanometers facility on chips. And then you have Intel setting up a facility in Ohio. You have Samsung setting up in Texas. You have Global Foundries setting up a similar facility in New York. So where are you going to find the brain power just to staff these facilities? So that's the biggest threat. And my biggest disappointment on the CHIPS Acts that they were announced of $50 billion or euro in Europe and also in the United States, my biggest disappointment is that there was no money allocated for scholarships of students to go and study at universities, electrical engineering, electrophysics, the hardcore engineering aspects that this industry needs. And these are very difficult. Part of my expression, you cannot bullshit yourself through these studies. You really have to study and get your degree, and they have an extra training when you join these companies. So to me, that's the biggest threat on the future of this industry.
Thank you, thank you. Well, before I wanted to come to you last, Viviane, in a sense, because we sort of set out from different perspectives where the EU digital decade or the market is. But I mean, I suppose the question on my mind is it actually possible really to talk about an EU market in digital? And do you think that there is a single market in digital, and does the EU digital decade really answer the challenge?
Look, I am a person who learns from the past, but looks at the present and at the future. And that's why I'm very happy that you spoke before me, because I can continue on what you said. Europe is a system built in order to achieve peace. And we managed that very well. And we invested in the well-being of the people, and we leaned back. Cheap security from the States, cheap energy from Russia, and cheap manufacturing from China. Okay, and then comes a wake-up call. And then we know we have to go somewhere further than just the well-being at short time. And that is when we set up the digital autonomy belief and action. Because you see, when you think about partnership and collaboration, I come back to what Annette said. You have to not to think about a paper you publish, but are you capable to be a real partner, or will you become a poodle? And we don't want to become a poodle. We want to become a real partner, and that is why we put our weight on digital autonomy, because before we can speak with America and with China, we need to speak with ourselves. And I am not so negative that we have not achieved anything. I think that in our research, we are doing perfectly well. And when I see how many research elements are taken over by other continents, that shows that we should better protect our research ones, but that we have good research. And we have also a very big talent pool, which can always be augmented and done better. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about something else. I'm worried about the way Europe is built up. We are a single market which is fragmented. And everybody goes for the good research in a university, the good students in the university, and then helps to build up a good startup with an aim of regional success. But if we want to become a European autonomy, we do not need regional success stories, we need European success stories. And for this we have to work together, to put our research together. I think we have managed very good to put our talent together and to put our money where our mouth is, and there we have a problem. And that is a problem of the structure of Europe. Europe is built, subsidies we can do, and we do more and more and more and more. The only thing is that I do not see why we have to do so many local subsidies. We should go for European champions. That means bring subsidies together and bring the success stories together. We are doing it in another way. We are doing it in local subsidies. That's wrong, and I have to speak later on how we should get out of this. But most of all, our financing structure is built on banks. And banks are not the right institutions for venture capital. Whereas the financial system in the United States is not built on banks, it's built on private investment. And there we really need to change because we need this venture capital, which is 10 times higher in the United States than in Europe. It's not that we don't have the money. When I see, for instance, our pension funds, they invest into stocks in third countries instead of investing into our capability, which means simply that we have urgently to do what I am promoting since 10 years, and that is a market capital union.
So yes, well, I remember writing numerous articles about the Capital Markets Union about 10 years ago when I was at the Wall Street Journal, and I hadn't really engaged with the subject at all for the last 5 years. And I went to a panel yesterday and was astonished to find that exactly the same discussion was going on 6 years later with the same arguments. So, but yes, it's clearly an idea that time must have come. We're running out of time, so everyone's going to be very quick now, but I do want to hear sort of really your best thoughts on what is the main priority for bringing digital autonomy, digital resilience, and improving the digital environment in Europe. Shall I start? I'll just start with you, Annette.
So I think the main thing is to really not just spread a lot of money around, but to think very strategically on a European level. You know, where is it we can invest money and really make the difference? And it can be in several parts of the semiconductor value chain. It can be in certain parts of generative AI. I think we can do a lot with companies and their things. So I think we have to kind of be much more strategic thinking in what is the stuff we as Europe can do better than the other continents. And I think the EU should play a role in it. This whole discussion about where can we differentiate, I think it's not really clear yet. And just to be very clear about that will already be a big step forward.
If I just go back to the end of the row here, and with you, Harris, I mean, you've... Firstly, we'd like to respond to Annette's disagreement with you. But secondly, also, though, what would be your main recommendation or the main thing you would like to see, particularly to speed up the rollout of 5G, for example?
Yeah, we may have different perspectives. It's about how you see the glass half empty or half full. I will go with the optimistic part of it. But at the end of the day, even if we have different perspectives, we all agree that connectivity is key in order to reach our objectives when it comes to digital decade. Today, it is estimated that we have an investment gap in Europe of around 200 billion in order to reach the 5G population of the US. And unfortunately, if you look at the telecom operators in Europe, you see the return on capital are really ugly. And in most cases, they are below the weighted average cost of capital. And that because of fragmentation in Europe and because we do not have big, large-scale, cross-border companies very strong in order to invest. So I think, and that will be very fast, I think looking at consolidation in country and cross-border to create a big investment companies and power in order to bridge this divide. I think we need to have a single market framework in many respects, which basically means we need to have a policy reset. We need to have spectrum policies, again, unique across the EU, not with a cash mentality up front, but with investment mentality. You know, we need to incentivize innovation and research in Europe, much more than we do currently. And last but not least, we need to see how regulatory asymmetry between the operators and the over-the-tops, what kind of problem that creates. 70% of our traffic in our networks currently in Europe is traffic which is created and monetized by over-the-tops. So there are a number of areas that we need to tackle as Europe in a unique way and in a single market type of way in order to be there and bridge the gap.
Thank you. So those are all interesting points. There's one in particular, I think, which is the cross-border consolidation, and the which I'd love to hear Viviane's thoughts on, but I'll come back to in a second. But Julian first, could you quickly give us your main thoughts, and particularly, I suppose, also, I asked you about government before, but obviously there's an issue with business too, which is crucial for.
So first of all, I want to underline that everything that Annette and Viviane said, I would say we fully agree as business. I can underline it. But we need three things from my perspective. One, it's a joint sovereign agenda for Europe to combine it. Two, and this is because we need speed, we need to create an environment where companies want to invest. So we are increasing by 30% our investment in digital security topics, and we do this by ourselves, and we are not looking for any subsidies, and we are not moving production to the US whatsoever. We simply look for a framework that allows us the speed to market that others have anyways, not additional handouts. And I think three, it was more mentioned than I could only underline it, is a liquid capital market that is coming from the private sector.
Very interesting. Max, before we...
I'll give you, I wish I would have better news, but I will give you the reality looking ahead into the future. United States politically is very polarized. Anything you want to pass through the Senate, even if it passes, it's going to be 41 in favor, 49 against, except one issue that is very bipartisan, and it passed 94 in favor with 0 against. And that's imposing restrictions in the supply chain of semiconductor chips for anything that is less than 7 nanometers that should not be sold to China or have access, or China have access to. There is already a lot of tit for tat between China and US and the Western democracies that are part of this complex and very advanced supply chain. So it affects Europe because it has been an integral part of this supply chain. And where we are progressing is that we're 7 years to 10 years ahead in terms of advanced technology of semiconductor chips. China is very determined to close the gap, especially with chiplets technology. But I personally think, looking into the crystal ball, and that's the reality, that we're moving slowly into the creation of 2 solar systems and 2 different supply chains. Then decoupling from China has already begun.
Thank you. Right, and that's not a very optimistic. You said.
I said it's not what I hope.
But so Viviane, I give the last word to you. And in particular, I mean, you did talk about one area, particularly where the single market isn't complete, which is in the Capital Markets Union, which clearly other people have agreed in. But Harris makes an important point, I think, doesn't he, which is that we have over 100, I don't know what the exact number is, number of mobile telecom operators in Europe. There are just 3 in the whole of America. We have a very you said we have a very fragmented market. You seem to be implying in your earlier remarks, really that we needed more of a European champions approach. I mean, are there just fundamental reforms of the single market that required the way competition policy, state aid policy is approached to make this digital autonomy more realistic? To you, Viviane. Sorry, yes.
Oh, you asked the question before, what needs to be done? Now, on research, I think we are on the right way. We should reinforce it. On talent creation, I have one problem, and that is the very low figure of women in STEM. We have to augment that because the female talent is there, but it is not utilized. I wish that we choose possible European champions, and before they are at the level of startup bought up by the Americans, we finance them with private market money in Europe. We have a beginning of very strong funds in deep tech. And if I have one wish, the last one, that is that the capacity we have shown at the medium level development of industry to be an equal capacity creator of quantum computers. Now we have to make a European champion with what we have at our disposal here, make it a world champion instead of waiting that others are doing the job by buying our talent.
Well, thank you. Well, this was a topic that we could have spent an entire conference discussing. I seem to have brought it in exactly at 35 minutes, so I'm sure the organisers will be pleased. But, and I'm hopefully provoked us, this great panel has provoked enough thought and conversation for it to continue over coffee outside. So many thanks to the panel indeed.
Thank you.